Mr. Richter, you worked with two European commissioners. You were part of what is called the European bureaucracy, that is, the people who have the real power in Brussels. What is it like to be part of the power behind the throne? Now that you are retired, could you tell us some secrets? But not very deep secrets, because perhaps they are dangerous.
Well, let me start with a quote from my first commissioner with whom I worked, Commissioner Bolkestein, who once said during a meeting, you know, the only thing I can really decide is when I can sleep. All the rest is determined by other events. So the question about power that you asked is an interesting one. The power, of course, lies in the end with the politicians who take decisions, mainly from the member states in the council, and then on the other hand, parliamentarians who take decisions. Us working with politicians, like also in the case of Mr. Orban, we are trying to prepare the ground so that whenever the person who takes the political responsibility walks out and makes statements or takes positions, is as best prepared as possible. So, yeah, if you refer to the secret, I would say it's having very good networks, to be in connection with as many other colleagues, with capitals, to know what is for the moment the mood, whatever the decision might be about. So cooperation, a lot of exchange, a lot of listening also instead of talking, is part of being close to the decision making. So avoiding traps, preparing the good ground for hopefully good decisions, yeah, which is not always so obvious.
So what is the real power of a commissioner?
The power of the commissioner is in the college to have the voice of his home, to be the influential part, to say, let's not forget that in whatever question, Romania is a specific country, has specific interests, has specific needs. Because if that person would not sit around the table, that part might be missing. And we had a discussion before the 2004 enlargement. Should the college now, in view of this big enlargement, be somewhat smaller? No solution that was proposed materialized, because everybody realized, how could that organ of collegial commissioners, that's why it's called college, as you rightly said, work if there is one or the other voice not around the table and can give that input? And I think it's also fair to say, Orban said this at several occasions, most part of the job is to explain at home what is happening in Brussels rather than the other way around. Yeah. So the power is very relative, but it's this constant potential to influence decisions, to be part of that negotiation process.
So the most important decisions belongs to the states.
Well, the member states are those who take final decisions, as I said, of course, besides the parliament, because they are deciding laws together. Yet the governments have the huge responsibility if you look at forthcoming decisions, like eventually granting you finally the access to the Schengen area. It will be the council who takes the decision. Yet in preparation, also your current commissioner was part of the commission's findings to say, yes, we can subscribe that the criteria have been met. Very important.
You are a German citizen. You worked with the first Romanian European Commissioner, Mr. Leonard Orban. Why was it so difficult for Romania to be admitted to the European Union?
Several reasons. One, which nowadays I think we can call almost objective, was you probably needed more time to get to the level of preparedness to enter the Union. You had a huge struggle in economic terms, and you have taken this on with a lot of brave decisions. The second element is a bit unfortunate, but the whole development of the exercise of 2004 had created what in the book also the former Commissioner Verheugen rightly called a fatigue, so a tiredness about enlargement. So there was almost this unease to say, do we need still more? But of course we couldn't leave you out, and that's why this whole process took eventually this longer period than for the other countries.
What are the similarities between Romania and the other European countries? Do you have the feeling of déjà vu coming here in Bucharest?
Well, first of all, I personally, fortunately, had the nice experience to come with the Commissioner after he had been in office. A very important trip for many of us who were not Romanians in his advisory team, to see also the country, to meet with politicians and to get a better feeling of the situation on the ground. Now, similarities, well, you know it yourself, you have a rather close language with Italian. I think
French,
there are also
Spanish.
French, Spanish, yeah, a lot of countries there.
Latin family.
Exactly. Yeah, my old Latin is sometimes helping me to at least understand some basic Romanian, which unfortunately faded over time. And of course, with your neighboring countries, in the current situation, you share, of course, the security concerns that have now, unfortunately, in this year, risen so much and become one of the most important questions we have at the moment.
How does Romania differ from other European countries? I'm interested in a few negative aspects, and please don't be polite.
Well, I assume you are indirectly referring to the ongoing discussion whether corruption is still part of society. I think I cannot really judge. I'm not living here. You would know this better. Difference, I think, is very clearly that you are lying at a critical border of the Union towards the outside. That was already the case before the war started. And your voice is sometimes not in the same way heard in the West, I think, as it maybe should be. You know, I found it very telling that in a very recent interview, the former president of the German parliament, Mr. Schäuble, admitted that he now sees that he should have had a different kind of discussion with Russia than he had at the time. And I salute him for being so brave to say, we overlooked something that was coming. You and others were telling us. We didn't want to hear it. So your country is...
because you are too far.
We are too far. We had our particular interests, and we thought it will all go fine until it went completely wrong. Yeah. Of course, it's always easy afterwards to claim that you knew it better before. On the other hand, I cannot overlook that there were warning signs which we didn't want to analyze to the last degree and could maybe have acted. Could we have avoided it? I'm not so sure. I'm really not so sure.
In Brussels, everything is negotiated. It is said about Romania that it never negotiates anything. It accepts everything that is proposed. How did you perceive Romanians' attitude? You said something before about that.
Well, I certainly cannot subscribe that Romania just swallows everything that's proposed. And that is definitely not true during your recent presidency, which I think you have handled with a lot of care and with a finesse of being diplomatic to get everybody on board. You closed a number of files that was, I think, unexpected when you took that responsibility. So you were not always easy in negotiations, but who is easy in negotiations? That, I think, should go to the pride of those who negotiate. You want to make your point. So as a young member you were at the time, no longer today after 15 years, that is a long stretch, you had probably, like anybody else, first to find your place. And being considered by, unfortunately, some as really the school kid you should tell how to behave and not speak too much. In the beginning, there are these famous sayings that some prime ministers were behaving towards some new countries, including yours, in a maybe not most diplomatic way, made it probably also not easy to find a place.
Today you are launching a book in Bucharest, LastTrain West, revisiting Romania accession to the EU. Why are there some doubts, some permanent reservations about Romania after the admission in European Union?
Well, first of all, let me say that probably sometime next year there should be a Romanian version of the book out. The publishers are talking to each other, so I'm hopeful that a broader public is able to read the testimonies that are in that book. Now, reservations towards Romania is probably a very strong word. But as I said before, we are not listening in the same careful way to your opinions as maybe we should be in most cases, and certainly in the area of security. Security at large, I would say. It goes well beyond just defense matters. And yeah, you are unfortunately sometimes in debates that have more to do with home politics in one or the other member states. You are used, so to say, as an excuse to have discussions that should be maybe more concentrated on the matter that concern those countries who are expressing negative opinions about Romania. And as we have seen in the recent discussions about Schengen, I understand there were also used information that were not always correct about the situation.
We will speak later about Schengen.
Yeah.
But another question, do you think that these close relations between Romania and the United States could be, let's say, a disadvantage in the European Union? Because not always this is so close relations.
No, I understand what you're saying, and it's true to say that both your country, Poland, and probably a number of other member states have a different relationship with the United States than some Western countries have. We are all very much aware that we need the collaboration with the United States. It has not become easier in the cooperation, independent of which president in the last years has been in office, and I'm not hopeful that it becomes easier, whoever will be president next in the United States. They have much more taken now a view that their big battlefield is with China, and that we Europeans have to sort out our own act. Now, with this different appreciation of the role of the United States between countries like yours and others, and our Western, let's say, slight hesitation how to position ourselves, that discussion doesn't become easier. So maybe we need, again, to sit around the table and define also our strategy towards the United States. That is not an easy discussion, and in the middle of all the other let's say, challenges that we have to face, be it the energy, be it the war situation and our response to it, leave alone what strategy we have towards China, that complicates matters. So what I'm basically saying in reply to your question is that we are having maybe too many issues at the same time that require a reorientation of the whole situation. And that makes it probably so cumbersome for the moment.
I succeeded in winning 3 grants from the European Parliament and had some very interesting discussions there between 2016 and 2019. An Italian official told me that Spain was against the admission of Romania and Bulgaria for a long time because they were Orthodox countries. How important is religion in Brussels?
I'm not sure whether this is true. I have never heard anything like this. Could be. But back to your point of religion. I have never ever, and also in the interviews, heard that your different religious background would have played any role in the appreciation of the situation in this country and in the question of enlargement towards the Union. Indifference, I think especially the European Parliament and the last presidents were vocal in defending the liberty of the different religious beliefs we have. And insofar, I cannot see that this really had an influence on the discussions. I would find this actually very sad.
Why was Romania's accession conditioned by the Cooperation and Verification Mechanism, CVM, unlike the other European countries?
Yeah. I know that this mechanism is much resented in this country. I understand this to some extent, and I'm very happy that now finally this recent past, the Commission finally proposed that you have fulfilled all the criteria. So that mechanism will come to an end. At the time, it was unfortunately the way the Commission felt they could get those member states on board who were still hesitant to grant you the membership in 2007. So it was a way to secure that we wouldn't have seen in the decisive council meeting all of a sudden somebody who would have raised so severe concern that the unanimity that is required would not have been given. This is an unfortunate thing. I'm not sure that anybody would repeat this. I found it very telling that the director who was at the time in charge in the interview called this mechanism the second best solution. And I tend to agree with him. This was not the ideal way to deal with the challenges that were underlying the whole question.
The problem is we have one side a technical decision, and on the other side we measure a technical decision with a political mechanism.
Yeah.
So this is the problem.
But that you have in the EU in several instances. Even if you think about the question of annual programs around the economic situation in a country, it's a technical matter. It requires discussions on the ground, very factual, but then in the end it translates into a political decision. This is the complication, the way we function between member states and the EU, that you need a fundamental analysis on factual grounds, but then in the end, basically everything becomes a political question that needs to be solved.
Let's go a little further to the east. What are Moldova's chances to be admitted to the European Union and to close the eastern border along a natural line, the Dniester River?
Yeah. If it were, first of all, so easy to close the border. We are seeing since the migration situation of 2015 much clearer than we did before that closing borders is not so easy. And whatever anybody might think about the decision of the then German Chancellor, in one aspect she was definitely right. There is no border for someone who wants to go away for multiple reasons, as we know, that can hold off these people. Now back to your question to the prospects of Moldova. Formally, they have been granted this next step to approach closer to the Union. I do not see at this moment any readiness in many member states to already give any, let's say, prospect in terms of timing how this process could go. And that has nothing to do with the war. That has certainly underlined the need that we need to have a structured dialogue with these countries. But it is more that the current countries are not yet ready to take additional members. Now, one thing, even though I might now sound contradictory to what I said earlier, one thing is clear: we will have to look into the functioning of the institutions, number of persons represented there, etc., if we enlarge by another number of whatever it will be in any future. I'm not so sure that a college of 30 or more commissioners can function in the same way as it does today. And these questions cannot be solved without touching the treaties. And if you open the treaties, we'll have a debate about many more things that for the moment are nicely covered, but there are still issues that need to be discussed.
Let's talk about Ukraine. When do you think this war will end?
Well, if I would have a glass ball, I probably wouldn't sit only to have an interview with you, but do something else. Let me first say that I'm impressed with the brave way this country is trying to preserve its territory and to help those people. We had ourselves for a couple of months a Ukrainian person living with us, so we have seen from close by the hardship that this country is experiencing, unfortunately. The problematic question of ending that war is the question at which price the aggressor is willing to stop what is happening in an awful way on a daily basis. And for the moment, I think nobody does see that prospect that this could be defined in whatever way. At the same time, I think nobody can expect that a proud country like Ukraine, with all the past, is willing just to give up whatever percentage of its territory and then would secure us that this is not just a frozen conflict that may break up in the near future. So unfortunately, also what I hear from other circles, as bad as I find it, I don't see that this war will end tomorrow or next week or even somewhere next year.
And now about the future of the European Union. There have been two trends of opinion since the founding of the European Union. A union of states or a single state in which the countries become regions of the European Union. We see there are pressures for the model of regions. Which one do you think is the model that will be adopted in the end?
Well, if you would ask my Secretary General, with whom I worked together over the recent years from the European Parliament, he would say, of course, we will one day be some sort of a conglomerate of states and function in a slightly different way. So I hope he might be right. My personal feeling is no capital in the Union is willing to give up its role they have in the current interplay between the institutions. Moving the Union into a different stage, as we tried with the constitutional discussion that happened during the accession time of your country, that failed then for totally different reasons, we made an attempt. I think the time is not yet ripe. Regions, however, yes, the cooperation across borders where certain countries have traditional links, that is a mechanism that functions and that takes ground more and more on a very practical way, with cooperation of police, with more intercultural exchange, with a lot of business context. So there is a lot of prospect, and I would hope that also Romania will experience that over time more. Can that translate into a different model of representation? I'm not so sure, because again, you are touching the foundation
the treaty
on which the Union has been founded. So you would have to start very freshly. The danger I see in here is that any reconsideration how we function would lead to some reflections of what is the scale at which we start to collaborate again, and who is again in a kind of waiting room situation, which is probably not the best idea.
Last week, the European Parliament voted a recommendation on reforming the decision-making process and accepting new members with a qualified majority instead of unanimity. How do you see this attempt? Because it's against the treaty.
Yeah, I understand that some parliamentarians logically get a bit nervous about the fact that there can be one single member for reasons that may be also not really fact-based, can stop any process. Fully understood the concern. However, if we do this against countries, if we just say we take these crucial decisions against a certain country, we send a signal and say we ignore your opinion. We don't make any efforts to have the discussion so that we can bring you on board. That is probably not a good idea to start discussions like this. Because then we are back to the old ideas of a Europe of two speeds, or whatever you call the model. We need to go through the painful process, which also sometimes our American friends don't understand, to have these lengthy discussions in order to reach the typical Brussels compromise that then sometimes is a bit weird, but it makes everybody equally unhappy.
Perhaps the balance of power between the European Commission and the European Parliament should be changed first. The Parliament is elected by the citizens, the commissioners are not. The Parliament doesn't have the right of legislative initiative. The European Commission does. Who really has the power in Brussels in this case?
Well, the power, as I said in the very beginning, lies with the member state and the Parliament, because they are the ones who finally take decisions or disagree and there is no decision. Between the commissioners and the Parliament, let me remind, and most people know this, commissioners are nominated by the member states, but they have to be approved by Parliament. And Parliament has, over the years, regularly rejected candidates that were considered not to be up to the job. So I think the Parliament has quite a strong role. The second element is, since a while, when you become commissioner, you have to sign the declaration that if the Commission President, in case of whatever would be the underlying reason, would require a commissioner to step down, that person will step down. So we don't want anything like it happened many years ago after the scandal around the French Commissioner Cresson. The whole college had to step down. So this shall not happen anymore. So I think the Parliament's control on commissioners is quite strong. The question whether Parliament should be able to propose legislation or not, I would say both institutions, Council and Parliament, already take, with the means they have, quite an influence on the agenda of the Commission. The Commission, of course, is still the one that finally decides, are we making a proposal? But I would say both, in the way that, especially since the financial crisis, the Council has taken influence at the highest level of heads of state and government, is influencing the way the institution is preparing certain proposals. And at the same time, also the Parliament, with the seemingly rather weak weapon of resolutions, is also pushing the Commission to take action, has become quite strong. Just think about the Commission's decision towards Hungary, as complicated as they are. They were driven by a lot of push from the side of the European Parliament. So I'm not so sure that this needs a reorientation. That works actually quite fine, and I think also the different presidents have a very good system in exchanging where things are and where action is needed.
Yes, but do you remember the last elections? We started the elections with a Spitzenkandidat, Mr. Weber, and at the end, what's happened? He was changed. It was an unhappy situation.
Certainly for him personally,
yes,
without any question. It was also, let's say, having an influence on the whole mechanics inside Parliament, all fair. I think those who came up with the idea of the Spitzenkandidat, it's, by the way, funny that this German word is now known everywhere. We will see what happens next time around. To my surprise, against what was discussed maybe after the election, where everybody thought, okay, that's the end, we tried it twice, at least this time it didn't work out, so nobody will come up. My feeling at this moment is we will again have lead candidates from the different parties. It will probably be again a question whether, if there would be a similar situation, this time Parliament would take the really courageous and complicated decision to say we sit this out and we will be stubborn. I'm not so sure what the end result would have been if Parliament this time would have been sitting on their heels and say it has to be somebody from our circles, from our proposals. This would have created a lot of complications. And the feeling after the elections was we cannot afford to have a situation where the institutions are seen to just circle around themselves. And let's not forget, in 2024, we will be in the situation that if I just look at your country, the European Union and the US, that we just had about 5 months earlier elections in the US, whose outcome is difficult to predict. You are running a number of elections in your countries. So imagine in all this complex situation, we would have then an infight who is the president of the Commission, which, in all honesty, as important as it is, for the people who have to take care that their bills are being paid, that they have a decent work and their homes are heated, is probably not the first question they are interested in. So we would send probably a bit strange signal if that would become the center of attention.
What influence do the big companies have on the decision makers in Brussels? When I was there, I heard a joke: if you want to propose a new law, first you need to consult the interested companies.
Yeah, I know that saying, and it's true and not true. Of course, companies have their networks and they prepare a lot of input from their opinion. Let's not forget that in the meantime, NGOs have become also very vocal and are influencing. For example, the laws now about the supply chains, where we have to become a bit more active to follow what's happening in the different countries. I fully understand this. It's a complex discussion, still ongoing, was very much driven by influence of NGOs. I think how much influence companies have in the end depends very much also on individuals. And we have seen cases where companies had quite some influence, but I think a very big number of decision makers are not taking calls from companies just like this. Last element, if you allow, lobbying sounds always so dubious. But in the process of developing laws, and I've seen it myself when I followed the famous REACH proposal with all the chemical registration, etc., it was also a source of gaining knowledge in an area where, when I was supporting politicians in this decision-making process, you didn't know much about those technical details. So for me, it was more an information source rather than having immediate effect on legislation.
The European Union started very late to invest in digitalization, internet technology. That is why we are not a powerhouse in the field. Why isn't there a massive investment?
Well, I don't know whether it's fair to say that we started late to invest. We started probably
Europe is not a power in this area.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I subscribe to this. We have left this to Americans, basically, and some other powers around. We are very good in Europe in basic research. We are producing excellent results. We are not so good in turning that into products. And that hangs together also with the whole way we allow companies also to materialize innovations. There we could become better. That is clear. I think the investment and the willingness for investment is there. We would have to speed up, but I see also here again there is more competition also between member states who is seen to be the best here. That is unfortunately not helpful. And we have this in a number of areas where we could be much stronger if we would collaborate rather than to have our little games between is now a French company or a German company or a Spanish company the champion in this area, rather than making them to collaborate and create the next generation of products. Maybe that will come, finally.
Europe's population is aging, and the research in this field is vital for extending active life.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't Europe become the world leaders in this field?
I think we have the chance, and especially following the COVID crisis, there is a big momentum in the area of health management that you can see. Just think of Parliament's initiative now to stronger look after cancer treatments, which of course is one of the source of many terrible illnesses. We are having a fully fledged program on rare diseases where a lot of the research is now coming together. There is even hope in areas like diseases that are more directly related to elderly people. I think we are doing a lot, and yeah, research needs always a bit of a lead time before results are out. You know, we have now also a bit of a society who always thinks as soon as we have a great idea or a plan, by tomorrow there is a result. We have lost a bit the patience that things take time, unfortunately, in many senses.
Are you optimistic about the future of Europe? How do you see the evolution of Europe until 2030?
Well, 2030 is relatively around the corner, so to say, in the way we have processes in Europe. But let me start with your first question. I'm coming from the Rhineland in Germany, and we have a nice saying there, it always somehow worked out. And insofar I'm in principle an optimist. And insofar I would also say the Union will still exist in 2030 and hopefully will be more consistent in some questions than it's now, and will give this feeling also, especially also to Romania, that you are an equal part in that wonderful cooperation we have in order to fence off other powers that are making our life very difficult.
Mr. Richter, thank you very much for the interview, and I wish you good luck with the launch of your book, for which you are here today in Bucharest, LastTrain West, Revisiting Romania's Accession to the EU. LastTrain West, when you wrote the book, did you have the film Last Train from Gun Hill in your mind? It was about a crime, it was a Western, about justice, love and hate.
Well, if you talk to some of the chief negotiators, they probably would tell you that every of these elements were in the negotiations, because negotiations can be very tedious. Actually, this was not the original title I had in mind. I had a dozen of titles in my head, and it was actually thanks to my editor, whom I wholeheartedly thank for his great work, who came then in the end, after long discussions we had, up with this title. And I found it so telling. And funnily, Commissioner Verheugen was indirectly hinting that when he said that you just caught the train, because if it wouldn't have happened at the time when the decision was taken that you have the chance to enter in 2007, you might still not be in. And I don't want to imagine in today's situation that you wouldn't have caught the train. So fortunately you got the last train.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.